blood sugar imbalance and stress. So in this video, I'm going to be guiding you through the link between something called blood sugar balance and the stress it causes on the body and the mind, and how that relates to diet, and also giving you enough information to help you start making the changes needed or identifying the changes needed in your diet to eliminate stress caused by diet. So first of all, let's ask ourselves why blood sugar balance is so important. Well, the very term balance suggests that the body, we know that the body's always looking for a balanced state. There's a term called homeostasis we've covered already that describes how the body is always trying to maintain a balance in various systems throughout the body. In terms of blood sugars, there is an ideal range of the concentration of sugar in the blood, and the body works very hard, incredibly hard, in fact, to maintain this normal range. And to do so, it has to keep the body's blood within the normal range. It has mechanisms to regulate it. And when it comes to the hormones, key hormones that help regulate blood sugars are called insulin, and then also the stress hormones. Particularly important to us are the stress hormones. In other areas such as diabetes, insulins are very important. But in this presentation, we'll be looking more at the stress hormones, because stress hormones can be secreted by the body at times to regulate blood sugars. And those stress hormones are cortisol and adrenaline. And they're generally released by the body in terms of this mechanism when low blood sugar levels are detected. And when I mean low blood sugar levels, I mean the low concentration of blood that is below the normal range. So the body takes action by secreting more cortisol and adrenaline. And that can lead to elevated levels of cortisol, which is what we don't want, elevated cortisol being a real key measure of chronic stress. So anything that elevates cortisol, usually not desirable in terms of stress management. Also, the blood sugar slumps that are associated when the blood becomes too low, they prompt cravings for more sugary foods, and they can also lead to anger and other negative emotional states. And anger and other negative emotional states caused by low blood sugars can really prompt poor behavioral choices and make us feel out of control of our behavior, leading to perhaps remorse, regret, and consequences which can further perpetuate stress. So eliminating blood sugar spikes and the troughs leads to consistent energy and a positive mental state throughout the day, which is way more desirable, and in fact is usually a relatively simple way to go about managing blood sugars. So it's really useful to know the symptoms both of when blood sugars are balanced and the symptoms of when there's an imbalance there. And when you detect in yourself or in others signs of a blood sugar imbalance, usually we can intervene quite quickly, quite easily, to start regulating the blood sugars way more easily. A very, very powerful tool to help manage stress. A very, very direct link between stress and blood sugars. So let's get to know those symptoms better. Let's start off with the blood sugar imbalance. So typically with an imbalance, it's kind of known as the roller coaster ride. There will be energy spikes where we feel great, perhaps of energy, but followed by periods of a slump. And the slumps are literally when the brain is not being fueled adequately, and it can feel pretty bad. Symptoms of that might be brain fog, poor concentration, erratic energy, mood swings, very, very direct link between the low blood sugars and all sorts of negative moods and erratic behaviors. But also there's cravings we get for sugary snacks. Those almost really hard to resist cravings for sugar are often coming, or not just sugar, perhaps coffee, sugar stimulants, energy drinks, often come when we're detecting we're getting low. And then another impact is that because it causes more stress, it can impact on sleep and broken sleep, and in the longer term, fatigue, because an unnecessary stress, an extra stress burden on the body can over time lead to fatigue as the body tries no longer can adapt to the chronic stress, and low productivity. So some of you may already be well aware that as I go through those symptoms, these are not rare. They're very common. The 11 a.m. slump and the 3 p.m. slump are very, very common throughout the typical 9 to 5 office or office hours or workplaces. So the wrong foods and the wrong food choices and drinks can very easily set yourself up or set your clients up for peaks and troughs and all of these negative symptoms. However, the strategic changes we're looking at later on in this presentation will help shift the body back towards a blood sugar balance. And the symptoms of blood sugar balance are consistent energy all day. So by avoiding the peaks and the troughs, we simply have nice steady burn of energy, providing the brain and body with a consistent supply of energy throughout the body. And it's a nice, balanced, relaxed, calmer energy. And therefore mental clarity, because the brain is constantly getting the energy it needs, is able to perform at a much higher level than the ups and downs it experiences in imbalance. Also, huge benefit of balancing blood sugars and eating appropriately is that we eliminate a lot of the cravings for the sweet things, the very things that set us up for more of the blood sugar balance. As a natural hunger, tend to get hungry for the right foods at the right time. And when meals are timed appropriately, we have energy to get to the next meal. Ability to concentrate easily. Again, the better brain function and this steady, calm energy I'm talking about. And then, because people have been less relying on the stressed energy and the adrenaline and the cortisol, they're setting themselves up at night for a more restful sleep and therefore a better quality of sleep, which sets them up again for a well-recovered brain, mental performance the next day. So a more alert state, both because of blood sugar balance and from the benefits of normal recovery from sleep afterwards, and all leading to a high productivity. So a great sell to you and to busy people who don't need to have time to eat properly is that by balancing blood sugars, mental performance goes through the roof, higher productivity, and people will literally get more done in less time and have more energy available to make better choices. So once you start balancing blood sugars, it tends to really work quickly. Here's an image that helps portray the roller coaster I was talking about, the blood sugar roller coaster. Typically, it's caused by processed foods, highly refined carbohydrates, sugary foods, and also another one would be caffeine through energy drinks, coffee, even nicotine. Too much or too large a portion of carbohydrate, and specifically refined carbohydrates. A typical example might be a fizzy drink loaded with sugar can very quickly cause a blood sugar spike. And then I'll be talking you through the physiology and the hormones soon, but the spike goes up. I mean, you usually feel pretty good after that temporary relief from the slump, and the body has to intervene, but what goes up must come down, and it's in the slump that we feel the cravings, we feel the irritability, we feel the anger that comes from the hunger before those cravings usually lead us to make more poor choices, a coffee and a coffee and a scone, or a few biscuits, or a Mars bar, or a chocolate bar from the machine outside, and then another spike followed by another slump, another spike, another slump, and throughout the day there's these highs and lows. Whereas the whole food glide, it calls it here, is this much smoother ride. It's much safer and less stressful in the body, because the body has got this nice slow burn of converting food to sugar, and then the body has this nice, reliable, consistent energy from food, and also with other nutrients throughout the day. And you will feel like you're gliding through the day. So now I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the physiology and give you a working understanding of a very important aspect of controlling stress through diet. So, and this graph here is a picture is a diagram representing blood sugar imbalance. So I want you to pay attention, first of all, to the X and Y graph here. On the left, we have the blood glucose level. So this actually represents the concentration of glucose in the blood. And glucose is really sugar. So the blood sugar concentration in the blood. Here we go from 0 to 10. So the ideal range is represented by the blue band in the middle, which is between 4 and 6. So the body is incredibly interested in what the concentration of sugar in the blood is, because too little, and the brain in particular, the brain needs a constant supply of fuel. It cannot stop functioning. So it needs a minimum amount of concentration in the blood to fuel the brain and the body. And then if the concentration goes too high, the blood becomes dangerous, and actually we can die very quickly from too much sugar in the blood. And this is why diabetics will often have to inject to bring blood sugar levels down before they cause a lot of damage. Okay, so that's the ideal range. The bottom of the graph represents time. So let's imagine we're starting off the day and breakfast. So if we have a breakfast that is what's called a high GL food, GL standing for glycemic load, which means that there's a large load. A high glycemic load has a large load of glucose. And that is usually foods like white bread, pastries, cereals, especially breakfast cereals. Nearly all breakfast cereals are very high in sugar, very high in carbohydrate. Cakes, scones, donuts, pastries, coffee, white toast, even brown toast. So getting aware of what foods are high glycemic is very important. So the wrong foods or too much of them cause a quick rise in the blood sugars. And you can see here where the line starts to go up above, the concentration of the blood rises above the normal range. And that is then detected by the body. And the body has to intervene because it's so dangerous. So how does it intervene? It has a mechanism through the insulin, the hormone insulin. So the body will excrete insulin from the pancreas. The insulin basically is shunted into the blood, and then all of the cells around the body, especially around the blood supply, will have insulin receptors. So the insulin binds to the receptors, and I think of the insulin. It's like a little messenger that says, "Open the gates." So gates open in the cells. Insulin tells the cells, "Hey, we've got too much sugar in the blood. Open your gates. Take some excess sugar out of the blood." So what the cells do is they open up the gates and they start to suck or withdraw sugar from the blood and put them safely into the cells. And the blood sugar levels start to drop. Now, be aware then that if the sugar goes into the cells out of the blood sugar levels start to stabilize. However, note of caution, and also a further motive for people to balance their blood sugars, is that spike, that sugar is initially converted to glycogen in the cell, but if it's not used, it will ultimately be converted to fat. So most of the weight gain is caused not by excess fat intake, but by excess carbohydrate intake, causing blood sugar spikes. And it's the insulin that drives it into the cells and then later into fat. So really kind of a good way to motivate yourself or clients is that this is how the excess becomes fat, very simplistically. Now to continue with the diagram, the cells are taking the sugar out of are instructed to take the sugar out of the blood. But what goes up must come down. Blood sugars fall. And generally what happens after a spike is that the blood sugar levels fall and for a period are within the normal range, but then they drop too far too quickly. And then very soon we have that we call it the slump, the blood sugar slump, when the concentration of the blood levels becomes too low. It drops under the 4 range here. And that is when particularly the brain is underpowered. So the brain needs a constant supply of fuel. It's not getting enough. It cannot perform to the level it's required. So that is usually experienced by things like fatigue. Your whole body can feel tired. Because the brain cannot function properly, mental performance goes down. but also the mood. So irritability and anger often come in here. And then the low brain function often experiences brain fog, not being able to think clearly, poor concentration, memory problems, it's not being able to remember simple tasks, and simply an inability to perform at the level people are accustomed to. Now, at the same time, the body was going to be crying out for what? It's going to be looking for some food to ingest. It's going to quickly raise the blood sugars. So we tend to have cravings, and the body's pretty smart. It tends to have cravings for specific foods. Sugary, highly refined foods are ideal at raising blood sugars quickly. However, when we have those cravings, if we cannot resist them, we tend to eat and very quickly relieve those blood sugar spike, blood sugar slumps symptoms. But we're on that roller coaster again. Blood sugar levels rise quickly. Say, for example, a person's having the 11 a.m. slump. Oh my God, I can't wait for my coffee, to have coffee, perhaps some sugar in it, to have a pastry, a scone, a slice of toast, some jam, or a Mars bar, or something from the machine, or they could be at the shop down the road, or something from the lunchbox that's sweet and tasty and yummy, and they feel better again, only for another spike to happen, and then what goes up must come down, and we're on that roller coaster. Now, what's happening at the same time as the cravings is that the body has another mechanism in case we don't get fed, or in case that we don't, if the cravings are not acted on quick enough, or the person doesn't get the blood sugar spike again. At the same time, the body is going to regulate the concentration and raise blood sugar levels by itself, and it does that through the stress hormones. Remember, cortisol and adrenaline will raise blood sugar levels, anticipating the fight or flight, anticipating the requirement of the of glucose-rich fuel going to the extremities. So that's where, during the slump, the cortisol and adrenaline are released here. Really, really important to know that in a nutshell, it's during the spike, insulin is released over time. That can lead to problems like diabetes and insulin sensitivity and weight gain. But in this context, the slump is where the stress hormones are released, causing excess cortisol and even adrenaline. So what we're trying to do instead is eat foods and avoid the stimulants, and then eat the foods that are called low glycemic load or low glycemic index foods, which are carbohydrate sources that convert to sugar more slowly. They're called complex carbs because the structure of the carbohydrates means it takes longer for the body to break them down, and as a more gradual release of their energy being sugar, into the blood. And because it's slower, we don't get the spike. And because we don't get the spike, we don't get the insulin release. And because we don't get the insulin release, and there's a nice gradual release of energy, which generally should take us to the next snack or meal. So the low GL diet really is the key to avoiding blood sugar balance, also timing of meals. There's other tips I'm going to give you real soon. But if you're not familiar with glycemic load and you're interested in this, go and research, get better at understanding what foods are high glycemic, what foods are low. At a very simplistic level, I'll be talking you through the most common high glycemic foods, and avoiding the real nasties is pretty obvious with a little bit of understanding and a good start. And over time, then we can get better at really focusing on the complex carbohydrates, which are generally the less processed, more natural whole foods. And because we don't have that sugar crash, we have energy all day, beautiful, more consistent energy, and we avoid the afternoon slumps and other energy slumps. And we also avoid those cravings, and we avoid the behaviors of perhaps irritability and anger, which brings me to the hanger, or being hangry, a play of words which represents the state of anger caused by the lack of food, hunger causing a negative change in the emotional state. So this is kind of a word that's bandied around a bit now, and a lot of people are aware of the hanger, the anger that comes with being hungry. So when that's during the slump, when we're hungry. We've literally allowed the blood sugar levels to go too small. The brain is underperforming. That's the number one to think of. At the same time, at a biological level, there are other things at play that perhaps make us more aggressive. Now, some people who are prone to this tend to really let themselves down when they're hangry. So even though it's kind of fun to talk about the hanger and we'll give the man a banana, he's just got the hanger, there's a real seriousness to this that can also be addressed, and through relatively simple changes, so much suffering and pain and stress and the vicious cycle of stress can be stopped with a very simple mechanism. So pay attention here. A little bit of interesting science around the hanger beyond the adrenaline and the cortisol kicking in and that low functioning brain that's prompting the irritability and the less control over the lower centers of the brain. And research has shown us that when nutrient levels drop and the body gets hungry, like I just spoke about, the brain releases a chemical called neuropeptide Y. And it's produced in various parts of the brain and acts on various receptors, including the Y1 receptor. All we need to know here is that when it's released, this chemical, this brain chemical, increases appetite, which helps us feel those cravings, but is also thought to produce an associate change in aggression and aggressive behavior. And you'll notice that either in yourself or in others that they're often getting more aggressive during the hanger. All the more reason, focusing in on this, it helps people identify with blood sugar imbalance, and then motivate them to make the changes. So how do we balance our blood sugars? There's three main rules to remember. It will go a very long way. There's 9 in this list, but the first 3 principles to get clear on is, number 1 is eat little and often. So, and what I mean by that is the general rule of thumb to balance blood sugars is to have 3 quality meals a day and 2 to 3 snacks between meals to avoid blood sugar levels falling too much between meals. So eat little and often, that typically looks like 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks a day, roughly halfway between the meals. And then the second rule would be kind of replacing the whites with the browns. And that's kind of a simplified version of getting rid of highly refined foods, or more specifically, high GI foods, high glycemic index foods, and replacing them with lower glycemic index foods, which are generally the complex carbohydrates, and in this term, the browns. So getting rid of the whites and replacing them with the browns or the whole grains. Typically, the most of our really high glycemic trigger foods are sugar, and then the white flour or highly processed refined carbohydrate sources. So just by choosing whole foods, more vegetables, cutting down on the carbohydrates like the rice and the potatoes and the bread, and bringing more vegetables in, and then we're swapping those whites for whole grain varieties and brown varieties, will go a long way to avoiding those blood sugar imbalances. The third thing is including a high quality protein with every meal and snack. So when we eat a protein with a carbohydrate, it slows down the release of the energy from the carbohydrate. So that might look like, with every meal, you're going to have something like your fish, meat, eggs, and then for vegetarians, we have lentils, beans, nuts, seeds. Cheese is another good one. So having a good quality protein with a meal, usually pretty easy to do. Vegetarians sometimes have to work a little bit harder, but really, really important. And then with every snack as well, which is often, it takes a little bit more work for some people, get much better returns. So rather than going for that chocolate bar or that coffee and a scone, you're going to look for perhaps a sandwich with, for even like a sandwich with some high quality meat or some eggs. Eggs are a great one. Cheese has a nice protein source in it as well. Nuts, so and nut butters. A simple tip there is replacing perhaps some people are really fond of their toast, white bread and toast, and butter could be replaced by whole grain toast with some nut butters. And that's simply adding the protein source to the carbohydrate. Nut butter and nut oil, and then snacking on seeds and nuts is a great way to get nice slow release healthy alternatives. One of my favorite tips is almond butter or peanut butter on a slice of apple. Delicious, and you're getting a nice balance there then of a protein with a carbohydrate, and really tasty and quite easy to do. Okay, then other things is basically avoid the sugary foods, the fizzy drinks. Don't drink your calories is a rule of thumb. Biscuits, real devils, a lot of us fall down on the moorishness of high glycemic treats, so-called treats. So avoiding them completely if possible, or cutting them right down, because one is never enough. And that can really set us up on that roller coaster. Limit the intake of stimulants. So be aware that caffeine from tea, coffee, and even chocolate, as well as energy drinks, can raise that blood sugar levels by triggering even without the sugar source, they can cause the blood sugar spikes. And then alcohol will also be converted to sugar, and nicotine. So some people often who are smoking will be having these little rises in their blood sugars. Increase regular exercise. So when a person is in perhaps a recovery phase or balancing blood sugar levels, they will regulate their sugar better when there's a good regular exercise. Specifically, more intensive exercise will start to train the body to become more insulin sensitive again, and that can really help regulate blood sugar levels. Don't skip breakfast. So people who are very busy and stressed often skip breakfast, but then they're going to be the stress hormones are going to come in and raise their blood sugar levels because it's been too long since they've eaten. So getting them to eat even a small breakfast that includes a protein source really starts them starts the day well for them, setting them up for more balanced energy. I also don't skip on sleep as well. Sleep, we now know, is a very, very powerful way of helping us control blood sugar levels and also appetite. So that's something else to look at, and another part of our stress management module. Don't eat on the run. Make time to sit and enjoy your food. That's perhaps another behavior a lot of people will need to stress people make the stress choices, like eating on the run, taking their sandwich to the desk. Not ideal. So trying to eliminate that and making time for the body to be prepared and then enjoy and then digest the food. Managing stress. Stress affects digestion. So take action to reduce stress, or anything else you're doing with yourself or others to manage stress will help blood sugar levels, because the adrenaline and the cortisol will be lower. Okay, so that's about it. So to a quick recap, there's a very, very, very direct link between diet and stress. The key thing there for us is that blood sugar slump. And the main area of concern is that underperforming brain. Think of it as a brownout. The brain is literally goes from having full energy to a brownout. It is functioning on less energy than it needs. So it's in kind of emergency mode. It tends to poor mental function, and then negative states of anger, irritability, and more aggressive behavior. And then the blood sugar roller coaster can cause weight gain, fat around the middle specifically. And then how we go about it is really the key here is a lower glycemic load, and the guidelines of eating little and often, protein with every meal, and replacing the whites and the processed highly refined carbohydrates with the browns, the complex carbohydrates. And that goes a long way to a much smoother ride and glide of consistent energy throughout the day. I will just add that when it's blood sugar balance is a problem and it's addressed, people who were thought they were stressed about so many things, and just so much stress kind of evaporates, because it was more about their diet than the state of their lives. And with consistent energy, people make better choices. So a real foundational step to managing blood stress long term. And I hope it's all been helpful.